Economy is one of the most important issues for voters across the nation. After a 1.6% inflation increase in Arizona, what does that mean for consumers in 2025? Plus, Donald Trump's inauguration is less than 24 hours away. So how do Arizona voters feel heading into a new year with a new but returning president? It's all that and more this evening on Broomhead. Welcome, I'm Mike Broomhead. Before we get into today's topics, let's take a look at the top story locally and nationally. On Wednesday evening, President Biden delivered his farewell speech, and he's not the first president who's had to deliver a farewell speech after only one term in office. In today's Political Minute, News Nation's Connell McShane takes us through the parting words of the one-term presidents.
President Biden says goodbye after only one term in office. I'm Connell McShane with News Nation. In his farewell address, Biden reflected on his more than 50 years in public service, including his 4 years as president. Now, certainly he's not the first president forced to frame a legacy after one term. President Lyndon Johnson urged Congress 5 days before Richard Nixon's inauguration to protect his legislative accomplishments, saying that a failure to carry them out would be a tragedy for the country. President Gerald Ford struck a different tone. Now, remember, he was never elected as president or vice president, and in his farewell address, he left the door open for a political comeback, saying, "This report will be my last. Maybe." George H.W. Bush spoke of losing in his final speech, which was delivered at West Point. "Losing's never easy," Bush told the cadets. "Trust me, I know something about that." And don't forget Donald Trump, who ended his first term by promising that he would be back in some form. I'm Connell McShane. This is the News Nation Political Minute.
Inflation in Phoenix increased by 1.6% in 2024. But what does that mean for 2025? We're talking with an expert about where Arizona's economy is headed next. It's important to recognize and thank the fine Arizona men and women who are serving in our country's military. One of the ways we do that is through a segment we call From Arizona for America, and it's brought to you by my good friends at Sanderson Ford. So join me in honoring Quartermaster Seaman Christian Bynum, a native of Phoenix, Arizona. He's aboard the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS William P. Lawrence in the South China Sea. For a list of more of our friends and neighbors that are from Arizona for America, just go to the News tab at cw7az.com. All right, to talk about the economy, where we are, where we need to be, solutions, joining us is Dr. Alex Tyson, an economics professor at Grand Canyon University. Thanks for doing this again.
Happy to do it.
It's good to see you. Fortunately for us, the numbers are coming in. The CPI and the PPI are in, Consumer Price Index, Producer Price Index, gauging inflation. But I want to talk about where people are financially. To get to where we need to go, isn't it more about wage growth now that we've moderated inflation?
Well, that's always the thing. It's easy to bring prices up, right? It's hard to bring prices down once they're already up. Right now, we've thankfully come down from some of the highs of 9% inflation that we had back in 2022, but we're still in this period where prices are elevated, and you're correct. Income growth is really going to be ultimately the way that you return from this hole that we've somewhat gotten ourselves into.
So the economy of Arizona has morphed and changed over the last decade, and we've really brought in a lot of industry. So we are bringing in some of those higher paying jobs. What's the key to wage growth consistently across all sectors?
Well, genuinely right now, broader business conditions in the valley are honestly looking up somewhat, right? We don't have the same level of cost growth that we used to have. The most important thing right here is that we have an excellent workforce here, that we bring in businesses, that we maintain demand for those industries that are going to be the source of growth in the future, talking things like semiconductors, solar, electric vehicles, et cetera.
Is the key, I owned a small business, so for me, everything is very, very simple, and I know it's not that way for everyone, but if you want me to be able to pay people more, I have to be able to hold on to cash. I have to be able to have access to money. Is that part of the key, is access to borrowing money at a lower rate?
Exactly. Well, right now we've had this period where businesses have been facing heightened, interest rates as the Fed has been really trying to get inflation under control. Inflation is somewhat flatlined, and I think that means that on the Fed side of things, it's going to be tough to see them lowering rates much more right now, which also means I think that on a national level, we should hopefully be seeing the conversation turning a little bit towards getting the fiscal house in order, towards making longer-term borrowing conditions conditions, the sorts of things that matter for longer-term business loans, that matter for mortgage loans for new home buyers in the Valley. Getting this longer-term fiscal house in order for the federal government and local and state governments as well.
When you look at inflation rates, the Valley at one time was one of the highest in the country, and it seems now we're at about 1.6%. Is it year over year?
Year over year.
So that means that we've moderated our inflation, but we're also seeing wage growth above 6%. Is that the kind of consistent balance we need to get back to where people are feeling comfortable and a good quality of life?
That's exactly correct. Right now we've thankfully got below the national average inflation rate. As you said, in Arizona, we've got 1.6% inflation here in the Valley compared to a national year-over-year inflation rate of 2.9%. And we've got projected personal income growth of about 7%, which is exactly the type of trajectory that you want to have Arizonans in a better financial state to actually improve their situation going forward.
When you explain the economy to first-year economics students, when you talk about what does the average consumer need to be looking at, when you're looking at projections from a professor point of view, what does a novice look at to see where we're going to be? What are the indicators you look for?
Well, quite frankly, you look at the data that you have right now, and you also look at what are the headwinds coming in. Right now you hear some noises about tariffs, and so hopefully we have some responsible conversations about that going forward.
Right.
You also have a lot of conversations about, again, as I already mentioned, hopefully some fiscal reconciliation of how exactly we get things on a more sustainable footing. So I think both having an eye on where we're at and also what are the challenges coming at us going forward.
And I'm glad you mentioned the tariffs, because the policies of leadership in Washington, D.C., but the policies also at the state level and the local level play a huge role in the ability for businesses to sustain and for individuals, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. As we're seeing right now, federal decisions matter a lot, but so do state and local decisions, right? Having responsible governance, having good pro-business and pro-investment policies matter quite a bit for the fiscal sustainability and the economic sustainability of our local economy and our national economy.
I always appreciate the input. It's always a great conversation with an expert. I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike.
We'll be right back. Donald Trump's inauguration is less than 24 hours away. Polling expert Mike Noble is breaking down how Arizona voters feel after the election and what their expectations for Trump are when Broomhead returns. Talk about voters, what their expectations are. We always go to the expert, Mike Noble, Noble Predictive Insights. Thanks for doing this. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. We made it.
I want to go back to where the voters were post-election, but in the month of November here in Arizona.
Yeah.
The President Trump, is up 24 immigration and border, national security plus 18. So right after the election, it looks like, at least in those two areas to start with, voters in Arizona are very optimistic about what he's going to do.
Yeah, when it comes to the pocketbook issues, Arizona's, we asked them what their expectations are. We know what happened in the election, but why and what are they looking towards? And so they're very much optimistic on the pocketbook issues, but also immigration and the national security aspect. I mean, they're feeling pretty good about an incoming Trump administration.
When you look at polling data, I know you're not surprised by Republicans being very positive about him and Democrats being negative, but how much do those party not declared voters weigh your polling? I mean, how much weight do you give them?
Well, yeah. Well, in Arizona, they're about roughly 1/3 of the vote here, actually larger than Democrats actually in size, and so they actually are more so on board. So like you basically have Republicans over here, Democrats over here. Independents, for the most part, on just about almost all issues, they're about right in the middle between the two. But overall, the independents are feeling pretty good about the expectations for Trump.
And looking at this on the immigration issue, immigration and border, the independents were pretty heavily saying they believe that Trump's going to do a better job. Do you think that's kind of what swung them over? Or is it the economy? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah, so we saw in the postmortem is that it was really issues. Like Trump was talking about the right issues, especially here in Arizona, because of the 6 battleground swing states. No surprise that Trump did the best of all the 6 in the state of Arizona, because the issue-wise it was inflation, jobs and the economy, and immigration, which voters said they trust Trump on that issue. Or Harris had threats to democracy and abortion, which are important issues, but not as important. They're number 3 and number 5 issues. So,
what changed? Because surprised a lot of people, myself included, that Biden won Arizona in 2020. So now we see this significant win for Trump. What was it that changed in the electorate, do you believe? Was it the performance of Biden over 4 years? What changed?
Well, I think the big change was that, well, we've had a lot of change. They haven't reelected anybody for president in some time, so we've been kind of changing guards. But also remember, Ruben Gallego, Democrat, won.
Yeah.
And he did the best of any Democrat in the battleground swing states. So it was really just the matchup, I think. I think Harris was very much tied to the Biden administration. So even half of Democrats said, hey, she didn't really become her own brand. Half of them thought she was still part of the Biden administration, other half there. So she couldn't really get out of that shadow. And Biden's job approval rating was just abysmal. It's like, hey, do you want to continue with this for 4 more years? Or do you want to, because it's an A-B choice, because third-party candidates really aren't viable.
So let's talk about polling and the trends that normally happen, because I know there's nothing normal about this with him doing a second term, but let's talk about expectations and what the polling is going to look like. If we don't see the tax cuts solidified, if we don't see something significant with criminal aliens in this country, what happens in your next poll?
Oh, absolutely. So I think that's why the next year or so are going to be a huge test for Trump, and also the slim majority in the Congress that the Republicans have. They have a very small majority over there. And so they need to really come through with some wins on this America First agenda. If they do, I could absolutely see Trump being the next Ronald Reagan. However, if they're not able to come through and deliver on some of these promises, I could see voters starting to sour and turn on him. So right now he's looking good and has a good position he's in. Now it's just a time to deliver, because the voters already mandated who they want, what policy they want to go with.
So if there is kind of a stalemate, if this turns into a big battle like we see in Arizona quite often with the vetoes from the governor, if we see the battle between the Senate and the House and the Democrats are going to stay united and they don't let a lot of things pass, does that hurt them for the chances of keeping the House and keeping the Senate in 2 years?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the thing, is that if they come through on the agenda, I think it's fantastic for Republicans down ticket. But for Democrats, if they're able to stall them and basically stop them from getting some of these big initiatives passed, they say, look, they didn't come through on their options. They have time to retool their message and their tactics. So frankly, I think, and I think the biggest issue is going to be really in Congress, just because you have the different factions of the Republican Party, and they only have, you can count on one hand how many member seat advantage they have. So I think really Congress, if they can get it together, Republicans can be united, they could absolutely set the course for them for the next decade or so, or we just go back to changing hands like we've been doing.
I always appreciate the expertise, and I can't wait to see the polls as the year goes on. Thanks for coming down.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
We'll be back. Homelessness in Arizona is an ongoing problem. Will Humble joins us after the break to discuss why homelessness is continuing to rise and what needs to be done to solve the issue. Here's a look at some upcoming events in January that should be on your radar. The inauguration of the 47th President Donald Trump, Monday, January 20th. It will begin at 10 a.m. in Arizona. Inauguration Day proceedings will air live on ABC, CBS, CNN, C-SPAN, NBC, Fox News, and PBS. And then it's the MLK Parade and Festival, Monday, January 20th. The parade will kick off at 11 a.m. with the festival to follow. The parade runs down Center Street, and the festival is at the plaza at the Mesa City Center. On the topic of homelessness, it's a complicated proposition to even discuss, but joining us, Will Humble, Executive Director, Arizona Public Health Association. It's good to meet you in person.
Yeah, we've been on the phone a lot, but this is the first time in real life.
The issue of homelessness, it seems like we are beginning to break into segments the problem. There are people that want services and they want transitional housing. There are people that are considered service resistant. But there's another group that you think or you believe is underappreciated, kind of ignored. What is it?
People with a serious mental illness. So that means stuff like schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, sometimes bipolar disorder. So that's a constellation of mental illnesses that really require intensive treatment, and not just psychiatric treatment, medications and so forth, and case management, but also supported housing. If you don't have a stable environment, if you have a serious mental illness, maybe you got your meds, maybe you have a good psychiatrist, maybe you have case management, but you don't have stable housing, you're unlikely to be able to stay on those meds, and they tend to then circulate from homelessness to being arrested to being incarcerated to having long-term hospital stays, and that population is at really risk of really bad outcomes, but they're also really expensive because all of those other costs in the healthcare system.
Isn't it also true that people that are suffering with serious mental illness many times are disruptive in shelters and other places, and that's why they end up in this
sometimes,
cycle?
Yeah, sometimes, but not all of them, and it depends where you are in your med cycle. So, right. So once you find the right medication and then you can get them into stable housing, then those behaviors that you're describing can often be resolved.
Right.
And so it's about getting the right kind of treatment. But yes, some of them.
How big is the issue? How many of the people that we encounter that we see that are unhoused, what is the percentage? How many of them are suffering from serious mental illness?
About half. So we have about 70,000 people in Arizona with a SMI designation, serious mental illness designation. 12% of them had experienced homelessness last year. So that's 7,500 people with a serious mental illness that are homeless. The point in time survey of all the persons experiencing homelessness last year was 14,000. So 7,000 of the 14,000 people that you see homeless, that's half. And they have a serious mental illness, and they're entitled to benefits under our state Medicaid agency access, including supported housing. But there just has not been the level of investment so that there's an inventory of the housing that's needed to give them that kind of stable housing.
So what's the solution? How do you solve that problem?
Yeah. So Access, our state Medicaid agency, is now embarking. Finally, they put in a waiver to the place called Center for, basically the federal government, asking them to implement what's called an H2O housing initiative, where they're going to do a concerted effort to get those the people that are cycling most into emergency departments and long-term stays, the most expensive segment of that population, into supported housing. So Access is asking for $5 million this year at the state legislature to help. We're going to draw down $15 million from the feds because it's a match program. And then that would go into a program where they could start to bite off some of this. It's not going to all happen at once.
Yeah, that's a lot. 7,000 is a lot of people. So do you believe that the expense is offset? The solution would offset the expense that we're already spending on this cycle.
Yeah, it's Access. Actually, there's an infographic which I was going to send to you, but I ran out of time this morning, that shows it depends on the kind of expense, but it's about a 40% reduction in costs once they get into supported housing. So this isn't just a welfare program to get people. This is a program to get people some stability so that they're less expensive in the correctional system, the inpatient hospital system, in the emergency departments, and all those other really expensive long-term stay places, because it's a lot cheaper to be in a stable apartment, a behavioral health group home, that kind of residential environment, than it is some sort of inpatient facility or jail.
And will they be able to, or some of those people, are they able then to move eventually out of that housing and into self-sufficiency with the right medication and treatment?
Yeah, many people, yes. You get stable housing, stable meds, good psychiatrists, they find the right medication, good family support, then you can start, that's called recovery. You start to be able to transition into independent living, maybe even going back with your parents, maybe even living on your own, a lot of them. So it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like a sinus infection like I sort of have. This is a longer term thing, and so it takes a while for the meds to kick in. But if that stable housing piece isn't in place, that's when you get what you look in the street and you say, this doesn't look right. Something's wrong with this person. And half of them, you're right, it's a serious mental illness where they don't have stable housing.
Oh, I think we both agree that I'm glad that we're starting to wake up and talk about all the aspects of this. And I really appreciate your expertise, and it's always been fun to talk with you. And what I would like to do is set up another time that, as this moves along, that we talk about the ins and outs of the program.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll be back. Thank you to all the guests who joined us on the show today. If you missed any of the interviews or you'd like to rewatch any of them, head over to cw7az.com/Broomhead to find out more information. Every Sunday here on Broomhead, we'll be asking a new poll question we want you to participate in. The question could be about the economy, water, housing, or anything related to Arizona. This week, the question is, do you think Trump will uphold his campaign promises? All you have to do is head over to cw7az.com/Broomhead to respond to the poll question. Join us next Sunday at 5 for another episode of Broomhead, and thank you for joining us this week.